Hello, everyone, wherever you are in whichever part of the world and whatever time zone. Welcome to this awesome discussion on systems of action. Just doing a time check. CJ gives me a thumbs up if I sound all right. Awesome. All right. Let's move to the next slide because that's where we lay out what we are going to speak about today. There are four essential sections that we will cover today. The first up is teeing up this whole topic of why do we really need to speak of systems of action? The basic question that we are trying to address here is why insights alone are not enough for enterprises and how moving from insights to action, which by the way reminds me used to be our catch line, Everest Group's catch line, are not enough for enterprises. Then is where we will tee up this whole topic of what systems of action are, which is a new architecture for AI first enterprises. Then, using that as a premise, we will go into the emergence of new technology categories as systems of action become table stakes within organizations and enterprises wanting to take a process first mentality to drive transformation. And then, last but not the least, we'll put some numbers around it because the first three topics are largely about the concept, the architecture, the emergence of categories, and then we'll talk about how it is going to really shift the market because our primary audience for today's topic is largely the technology vendors who must definitely be interested in what's likely to and how it is likely to shape the market. Beyond this, you might anticipate us to answer a few more questions, which is some basic questions. How to make AI work in large enterprises is a very common question that we get, and we'll try and address that. Questions or some of these comments that we get around, hey, we have done tech for decades. So what is really the missing piece here, which requires us as a research and analyst house to be speaking about systems of action? And then last but not the least, this question about buzzwords. Generative AI, artificial general intelligence, services as software, agentic AI. I mean, we've had so many buzzwords pop up in the last 12 months or so. So is systems of action one more buzzword where Everest Group is coming up with a Me Too, raising their hands to talk about it? Let's delve into that controversy also, and we'll try and address that. So with that, let's move to the next slide. Well, we will ask you this question around, as you work with your customers, how would you describe the majority of your customer organizations as adopters of AI? Do you think they are watchers, with basically folks who are observing AI from the sidelines, allowing individual adoption of tools but not really scaling it? Experimenters who are testing AI in pockets, like use case specific scaling? Or do you think they are committers? They are scaling AI with intent. They definitely want to be seen as adopting AI for transformation across their process and functions? Or do you really think they are transformers, redesigning their entire structure for AI first? I can tell you one thing, and CJ, tell me if I'm overstating it. The steps that we have taken internally at Everest Group, I think we fall under the transformers category, if not the committers. What would you say?
I'd agree. I think, and it's very instructive when you talk to a lot of our customers. I find it very instructive because I think there's a lot of nuance. I think if you look at intent, every CEO today wants to be a transformer. I can't think of a single organization, a single CEO who isn't thinking of going AI first, right? Having said that, that's a long journey. And there's a lot of associated issues, which is not just the technology, but it's around process redesign. It's about talent. It's about the underlying infrastructure. And the biggest elephant in the room that I see is really the data architecture, right? And while the intent is really around being a transformer, right? I think it starts with experimentation. but there's real commitment as well, right? So I think it's a little bit of a progression that we see. And that's the gap between intent and what's actually happening on the ground.
That's where we see the poll results. And I'm not surprised because that in our research is also a reality. 68% of the respondents here mentioned experimenters as what they see their client or customer organizations behave as. And this is pretty much what we are trying to address here. In fact, this is a very good validation of why we need systems of action. So let's move to the next slide because yeah, that's where we'll talk about some of the common quotes that we have picked up from the market. And these are the two that I really love and that I wanted to kind of just put it out there and read through it. First up, here's somebody saying systems of engagement. And when I use the word systems of engagement, these are customer portals that we are talking about. Some organizations even call their CRM systems as systems of engagement. What this individual is saying is that systems of engagement often plateau at generating intelligent dashboards. In fact, he used a word glorified dashboard, which I did not put it here, but that still depend on someone to act. And the second quote says that enterprises today have no shortage of insights, but a scarcity of agents. And note the fact here, both human and AI, and a system capable of executing on them. So what is essentially being brought out here is that because of the investment and buildup of technologies that we have seen in the last many decades, and especially so in the last 10 years because of the advent of public cloud, digital transformation, and related concepts, we have, or most organizations have, a plethora of dashboards and ability to generate insights from various parts of the organization. I think where organizations have started to discover critical paths in their workflows or in their objective to get to results is that insights, if they sit inert where they are pretty much inactionable. Somebody has to act on them to get to the results that you really want to. Even in a CRM system, a deal coming up for renewal in 30 days is just an insight. Somebody, a human or an AI agent, has to act upon it to trigger the next portion of the workflow to make it happen. How do we make it happen? How can AI help in that is the question that we want to address. So let's move to the next. And CJ, let's move to the next slide. And here is where, CJ, I wanted to stay true to my character and do something funny, or at least attempt to be funny. Let me see. I tried to do it using the background on. Oh, sorry. But I could not. So I'm going to use a non-background. So since we are going to talk about systems of action, CJ, for you, lights, camera, action.
Oh, that's a cool one. And you lived up to your reputation. I wouldn't have expected anything else, right? But, I'm just very, very happy that you didn't show me a dashboard instead. Could you move to the next page? So speaking of dashboards, and Abhishek, you spoke about what I call dashboard diarrhea, right? So let's hear it from our audience, right? What will really transform enterprises? And Abhishek, you spoke about all the technology investments that have been made over the last decade and a half, right? I think it was circa 2010 that we started hearing this thing called digital transformation, right? And it's very interestingly, we polled the enterprise market last year, and we came up with a very interesting little nugget, which showed that 68% of enterprises are not satisfied with the business outcomes that they're generated from their technology investments, which is really a staggering number, right? I mean, more than 2 out of 3 enterprises, in spite of spending billions and billions of dollars over the last 15 years or so in digital transformation, claim that they are not happy with business outcomes, right? So, and that really talks to your point, Abhishek, around where are we? Because I think a lot of technology investments that have been made, don't get me wrong, they were required, they were valuable, they were insightful, right? But they don't really move at the velocity of decision making that modern enterprises need to operate at, right? And here we have the voice of our audience. 56% of our audience says that, yeah, we're going to need a small army of AI agents. 40% say, it's a Hail Mary. And we could do with a miracle, or 10, right? Or maybe, just maybe, there's this strange thing that we are talking about today called systems of action. Okay. Let's move to the next page, right? And let's try and demystify what systems of action are with some basic building block definitions and examples, right? So what are really systems of action? And Abhishek, you spoke about systems of records and systems of engagement. So systems of records, think of system of records as your inventory systems, your procurement systems, your basic ERP, financials, so on and so forth, right? Systems of engagement are shopping portals, digital commerce platforms, even CRMs in lots of places. And, we have heard this thing about, hey, we're going to deal with these two aspects differently. And to my mind, it feels like a cop out, because what you are really doing is you are creating more silos in enterprise IT. You stand up these two separate towers and you think of them differently, and you say, oh, that's legacy systems of records, and I'm going to starve those. And I'm trying to focus on systems of engagement, but systems of engagement and systems of action really need to talk to each other for real insight and action, right? And what systems of action are not is a third silo. So we are not saying that that's a third pillar in enterprise IT. Or contraire, what we're really saying is systems of action is the missing linkage that cuts across systems of records and systems of engagement and brings an enterprise closer to action rather than mere insights, right? So how do we characterize systems of action? A true blue systems of action demonstrates four key characteristics. Number one, it is able to close the gap between insights and action. Number two, it does this by operating with a large degree of autonomy. And by autonomy, I mean its innate capability to work off adaptive logic and learning. Number three, it is able to build adaptive logic and learn by orchestrating across multiple systems and domains. Finally, it is able to do all of this at scale. So it's a living, breathing, scalable solution which starts generating mass on its own as it picks up more logic, more learning, right? And then it is able to act with a great degree of autonomy. All right, so you're probably wondering, CJ, you're giving me a lot of big words. What does this really look like? So let's look at a couple of examples. Let's move to the next page. So there are many examples of this, and Abhishek, I'm going to ask you to talk a bit about it in the context of specific industries. But for now, let's look at a couple of these. One is Amazon, and by Amazon, it's not AWS, but Amazon, right, which all of us use. And if you really think about Amazon's order fulfillment process, it goes all the way back to demand forecasting systems which pick up hundreds and thousands of signals. And based on that, auto adjusts inventory management, auto adjusts procurement, right? Once that's done, then you get to the thorny issue of, okay, what am I going to do with that inventory? How do I make that inventory available and deliverable at all times in the most efficient, effective way? That's where AI-enabled robotic systems comes in. And then how do I do the last mile connectivity, which is really around delivery experience? So how do I deliver what I promised to deliver to the customer at the most profitable and the most efficient manner possible, in spite of a huge number of spanners thrown into my works in the form of bad weather, traffic, delivery windows. Somebody says, no, this is an office address. You can't deliver here on a weekend, right? How does the system adapt to all of those signals and optimize routes? finally, the question comes around reverse supply chain. How do I minimize reverse supply chain through in the form of orders? How do I auto resolve customer complaints, right? Without having a massive human enabled contact center infrastructure, right? So, and all of these, if you think about it, each of these are mini systems of action in themselves, but when they start talking to each other, that's when you start looking at really breakthrough business model disruption, because it's just a different digital business model with a very different focus on outcomes, right? On the same vein, and as maybe a sister version of this is UPS's delivery systems, right? And UPS critically relies on its ability to make real-time route optimization to be able to run its business profitably with high customer satisfaction, right? And it's one of the most complex problems in the logistics industry. And if you look at what UPS's Orion system does, that's exactly a version of systems of action, which is literally, again, picking up millions of possibilities, triaging that against external data, internal data, customer data, and optimize all of that real time to trigger route allocations to its staff, and thereby optimize not only delivery time, but also create a greener footprint for its operations, right? So these are just a couple of examples. There are many more. Abhishek, do you want to talk about some of those in the context of a particular industry?
Oh, so many examples to talk about, CJ, and just a kind of a bit story about it. If we move to the next slide, I was looking for a example wherein I could really bring out the need for systems of action to life. I had a few examples of my own having experience in the healthcare and life sciences industry. But as I was checking up with my colleagues, one of my colleagues, Ronak Doshi, who's our in-house Energizer bunny, very passionate about the insurance industry, actually nudged me to talk about property and casualty insurance. And his take was like, hey, property and casualty insurance still runs on outdated manual workflows. Yes, there is a lot of technology, but the handoffs and the intervening manual interventions that are required slows everything down from underwriting to claims to compliance and servicing. Now, what happens is that these delays, as they are caused by various, and by the way, these are all practical issues that the industry deals with. It's not something that has been deliberately created. It's a function of the reality of the market itself. But in essence, as we, all of us, I'm pretty sure we have home insurance, we have auto insurance, and we have dealt with the cycles of dealing with both premiums going up, filing for claims, etc. The the delays that happen here erode trust, drive up costs, and essentially create a very bad experience. Now, one of the key coordination and decision bottlenecks that happens in PNC insurance happens to be the usage of technology and how actions could be enabled there. And we will touch upon that. But to bring this to life and without going into the specific details of hey, how infrequent updates and backward looking models impact actuarial or pricing, or how manual triage and basic projects impact claims management, we wanted to pick up a specific area of property and casualty insurance, which is the reinsurance part of it, wherein we have seen it very closely, how systems of action could really change it. So let's take a look at this specific video that we have put together to see what systems of action can really do. Let's play the video.
That's really exciting and inspirational, Abhishek. The ability to and in some ways I find myself inspired by this vision, because what it really does is promise what we have been talking about for ages, and which we have seen happen in some organizations, but this is true democratization of business model change for everybody. So it's not just for the Netflixes of the world, right, who created a different disruptive business model, but it really makes business model disruption a reality and a potential for every organization in every industry that's out there. Before we go further, right, we are absolutely anticipating this question. We have a question from Pankaj. Pankaj asks us, how is systems of action different from agentic AI? Abhishek, do you want to talk about that?
Oh, absolutely. That's the $1 million question, isn't it? So Pankaj, the answer is very much system of action get enabled through agentic AI. And we'll be talking through a bit more in detail how agentic AI actually brings systems of action to life. But let me give you a brief preview of that. Essentially, what we are talking about is that there are core building blocks of system of action. One of them being decisioning, and the other one being process orchestration, both of which require agents to play a very strong role in that. And when we speak through all of those building blocks, we'll talk about how agentic AI is going to be core to it. But as we know, as we stand here right now, uh, agentic AI is only at a certain level of maturity. It's the question of how agentic AI applies from the context of the guardrails within your organizations, what tools they or access to take deterministic decisions versus probabilistic decisions, which we see as a kind of a risk with generative AI. So those are some of the questions that enterprises will need to solve for. Good news here is that enough has taken place in the last 6 to 7 months for us to see light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to how agentic AI will actually lead to organizations having the full trust in enabling systems of actions through it. So I'll keep it at that and come to more details when you come to the category.
Yeah, I'll probably, add a little to that, which is that, Pankaj, think of systems of action as the cherry on top, right? That's what makes the pastry really tasty, right? But it's, without a lot of other building blocks, it's just a cherry. It's not the delicious pastry, right? So there are capability blocks around data, around security and compliance, around process activation, right? All of which together build systems of action. And, we believe that if we just think of agentic AI as the only lever, right, then it's not going to be a scalable solution that truly actions against enterprise value creation, right? But we'll come to that.
Yeah, I'm just doing a time check, 33 minutes to go. And plus you mentioned pastry, so I'm feeling hungry too. So let's keep moving along. Next slide, please. So we talked about PNC insurance. Saw a video on reinsurance. So this is what action looks like. I won't go into the details of the specific aspects of the issues that we called out, which is the before and after. When you will get the deck, you will just able to see the note differences here. But the key point here is that the manual processes, as far as they exist, need to be replaced with agents, to going back to Pankaj's question around it. So whether it should be around real-time fraud checks, dynamic pricing, AI-driven underwriting, automated compliance, all of these are in. At the heart of this transformation is what we are calling the systems of action, which basically brings together one, perception, to sense signals and context in real time. So that's the most important aspect, which is the enterprise data. The second aspect is inference, which is to determine what matters and why, because on the basis of that, decisions can be taken. And then the last piece is agency as a dictionary term, which is the question of who or what can take purposeful autonomous action, with whether it is the connected data pipelines, machine learning, agentic AI. property and casualty insurers will not just analyze, they will be able to act instantly and intelligently. So that's what we are talking about. Now the question becomes, moving on to the next slide, please. What is really holding back enterprises from becoming systems of action? And what we like to use as a term is PTSD, if you go through the acronym of the terms or the debts that we have mentioned here. So it's P for process debt, T for tech debt, S for skill debt, and D for data debt. Unless this PTSD is resolved, transformation remains more ambition than execution. So just taking the example of data debt, because while we are speaking of technology debt a lot more than others, abundant data but fragmented and outdated prevents organizations from accessing it, which essentially leads to organizations trying to create centralized data layers, so on and so forth. What agentic AI is opening up as a possibility is that data can continue to reside where it is. Essentially, what organizations are able to create is what is called a data fabric, wherein through the usage of agents, data could be accessed from anywhere it exists, whether it is the edge or from enterprise systems or systems of engagement, and decisioning or inferences can be run on top. But what this also requires is the thought process around the process debt, which is not talked about enough. And we'll touch upon this aspect when we come to it later, which is the whole question of when organizations take a process first mentality, how does that start looking at the same workflows differently? How people start to assess and analyze manual interventions and exceptional handling differently. And that is what essentially leads to that thinking around systems of actions. And we'll come and touch upon that. But before we go there, let's take your opinion. You have heard us talk through all of these four points around PTSD. What do you think are the most important deaths? Let's move to the next slide and launch the poll. So, which of the following debt solutions do you believe is most critical for enabling systems of action? Do you think solving for process debt is what is going to solve for it? Technology debt, I'm pretty sure a lot of you will talk about as being important. Skill debt is also, by the way, a very important aspect. As we are ourselves on that journey of becoming AI first, what we are noticing is that even within our organization, there are AI first folks who are taking to AI almost like fish takes to water. But there are folks who are using it intermittently or just almost like an alternative to Google search. And that creates a wide variety of productivity improvement, even at an individual level. And that's why I have started using this term, which is called digital literacy, how to drive knowledge about how digital is going to impact your individual productivity first before you head to team level or function level or even organizational level. And that is going to be a really important aspect of it. So as it comes up, I'm just looking at the results that are popping up. Interesting. So let me just go ahead and publish it. Okay. Interesting. Oh, I'm really delighted that 31% of the audience actually thinks process debt is an important aspect to be solved for, which, CJ, I'm pretty sure you will agree. This is the core of what we want. And obviously data debt.
Absolutely right. So this is, very much in line with what we are experiencing as well, right? So data and process, and the larger the organization, the more the acquisitions it has completed, the more distributed its operations, the more acute some of these challenges, right? Let's look at some of these, and I think Toby has a great question. Addressing systems of action requires competencies in process automation, agentic AI, low code, and data management. Who is best placed to succeed here? So that tees up what we are going to talk about, the foundational capabilities perfectly. Toby, thank you for your question. We are going to take that on.
All right, let's move on to the next one. All right, so now we will talk about the emergence of the new categories here. We touched upon that a bit, but this is very important for us to be talking about that. Hey, since we are talking about evolution of systems of action, how will enterprises will actually be taking decisions around categories or technology categories in terms of tech that they will buy? To build real systems of action, there is more than just the definition of systems of action that is required. What we believe, there are four important buckets or building blocks of this, under which systems of action will need to unravel. They will definitely need these new capabilities, or in certain situations, evolved capabilities like security and compliance. But for all practical purposes, it starts with data activation to make real-time contextual data usable, moving on to then decisioning, which will allow for operationalizing AI through embedded autonomous decision making, and then process orchestration, which will execute those decisions almost in an autonomous manner. While all of these are important, the evolution of security and compliance as an embedded layer, and in terms of what technologies enterprises need to enable, will be a very important aspect of it. So whether it's enforcing identity, access and policy management across enterprise systems, data access, so on and so forth. If you notice, what we are calling out here is the fact that the primary buyers, as you see there are builders, developers, data engineering teams. CIOs will be closely involved across the stack, but especially so with data activation. IT automation teams, op transformation leaders will be taking key decisions around process orchestration, and CISOs and risk and compliance leaders will have a key role to play here. The question that in your mind would be that, hey, aren't these systems or a variety of these systems already in action or available out there in the market? I would say to some extent, yes. And that's why I have mentioned a few representative vendors who kind of overlap with these categories, or rather the evolving categories. But the important thing to understand is how this is likely to play out in an industry context. And that's why I'll request to be moved to the next slide, wherein I will take a look at one very specific industry use case, which is in this case, a loan application initiation. Now, if you see, we are trying to address this particular use case from the same categories or archetypes that we discussed in the last slide. First up is going to be the question around, hey, what are some of the first steps that need to be taken here? First, data activation will need to ensure that real-time financial and identity data from banks, credit bureaus, and CRMs needs to pulled up. There has to be a system that has the ability to be able to do that without the need to create a central data layer. Then the decisioning engines will have to access pre-qualification using credit scores and risk models. Once that happens, that's where process orchestration will take over, routing applications for instant approval, whether it is for documentation or human assistance. That orchestration still needs to happen. And what you will notice here is that it's not that the human intervention is completely being circumvented. There is a lot of human agent activity that will, or human agent interaction that will happen in this case. But the significant delta here is how much agentic will replace the human interventions, so that humans end up focusing on the exceptional exceptions rather than all exceptions that typically humans handle in these systems. And through it all, security and compliance will ensure eKYC, digital consent, and data privacy. This is how SOA ought to look like in this particular use case. And that is why, CJ, I'll hand it over to you to understand, hey, if this has to happen, how can the tech industry really deliver on it?
Sure. Yeah, and let's move to the next page. I'm going to speed us up a little bit, right? As you probably realize by now, Abhishek and I can talk for days and days through it. But I'm in the interest of everybody's time, I'm going to keep us moving at a fast clip. So really, if you think about it, we see systems of action as a combination of four building blocks: security, compliance, process orchestration, decisioning, and data activation. And if you look at the entire software industry, you'll find all flavors. You'll have incredibly static, siloed legacy software in enterprise environments. Everybody's trying to build some automation. Everybody's trying to build some connections. Everybody's trying to build workflows around that. Everybody's trying to build event-based triggers around that. There are an army of agents which don't always necessarily talk to each other in many environments, right? But then as you move towards SWA grade capabilities, you're talking of contextual data fabrics. You're talking of a mesh of agents that are able to learn on an adaptive basis. You were able to you were able to deploy systems that operate of tightly interlinked process networks, right? And finally, you were able to secure all of that with systems that are able to build in and dynamically adjust to new environmental triggers. And all of that together creates an SOA grade architecture. So, and I'm going to lean back on Toby. Your question is very valid. Who's most likely to succeed? Let's look at the next page. And if you really see where the world is today, we took a quick look at a bunch of really big names in the technology industry. And we looked at their capabilities and their current product offerings across those 4 building blocks. And one of the things you will see is that very few actually have multiple green dots across different categories, right? And there are only a few which have green dots at all. So, it's an evolution, and the industry is trying to outpace the potential here. But do we know who's going to have it all figured out? Unlikely, right? And is there going to be this one ring that binds it all? Again, the jury is very much out. And if history of the technology industry has any relevance here, then the answer is probably no. We're not going to see this one single dominant stack that is going to cut across all those building blocks. And the reality is that as the technology industry matures, we have always seen different tech software companies carve out different dominant positions, right? And build extensions on top of that. And with further maturation, there comes more contextualization to industry specificity. So that's how we see that's how we see the space evolving in the medium term. Let's look at the next page, right? So we spoke about how we looked at different industries and different vendors and their offerings. So here's an offer for our audience tonight. If you are trying to go down that same path, right? Share with us, feel free to click on the link or write to us, and we will take a look at your offerings, and we will conduct an assessment on SOA readiness, and we will get back to you with a complimentary readout and a discussion on what are the next steps you need to take around your offering to make it SOA grade. So feel free to write to us. That those are our email IDs. You'll have the deck with you at the end of the webinar. Feel free to reach out to us, and we are happy to learn from you as much as we'd like to share what we have learned. All right. So Abhishek, back to you.
Next slide, please. So the question here becomes, we were talking about the here and now, but there is also this question of, as we are progressing forward, will these categories or capabilities that we are talking about remain static, or will they evolve? And we have taken a kind of a crystal ball view of that. And given the amount of time that we have spent, one thing is pretty clear. If you look at the first 3 capabilities, which is data activation, decisioning, and process orchestration, they are part of one whole itself. And in many ways, these will eventually combine together to what is called an action orchestration platform. Because whether it is data activation, which is sensing data, whether it is decisioning, which is being able to make the right inferences, and then the process orchestration, which is ensuring action happens, has to be part of one fabric that enterprises will need to create. The question is, will enterprises be creating it or putting it together using the Lego blocks that the vendors that we were showcasing on the previous slide? Or will vendors evolve themselves into creating platforms that will act as action orchestration platforms? Interestingly, as I was reading through a blog written by one of my colleagues, Sharang, on the recent announcement by ServiceNow, seems like they are thinking very similarly to how we imagine systems of action. So there is already validation of how this industry might progress. But then let's look at some of the new categories. Security and compliance obviously will have to evolve into trust and safety orchestration, because that is going to be an important aspect of what enterprises will pivot to in making decisions around adopting platforms. But as we evolve, there are two new categories we are seeing that will eventually get created. One is the autonomous agent networks, which, because of the evolution of the agent to agent protocols, MCP, and others, which is just starting off, still in its early days, but will ensure that the digital talent or the agentic population that we are going to create within or across enterprises can interact with each other and create greater collaboration without the need for humans. And then last but not the least, need for digital simulation platforms to kind of drive new age product development for organizations who will be operating through agentic, and to have the trust to test it out in its full expanse before launching it will require organizations to be thinking of synthetic enterprise builders also. This is again two areas which we are kind of really looking at deeply. Moving to the next slide, these are some details which bring out how this will pan out. But the important thing is to understand this. Systems of action, and this is a 2030 view, will not just create new categories. They'll reshape how enterprises buy. So decisions won't just come from IT alone. And that is something that we have to understand and appreciate. Leaders across risk, ops, data, compliance, business lines will co-own this shift, guided by what we are calling a process first mentality. They will seek platforms that can unify sensing, unify reasoning, and act across end to end workflows to enable action. And that's why the SOA technologies, as we are referring them to, will be procured as enablers of business outcomes and not just tools. And that is why what we are saying here is this is technology strategy recentered on the process and not just the platform. And that is what, if there is one thing that we would like you to take away from this webinar, is this statement. So having heard from us, let's check your opinion on this. Move on. Let's move to the next slide. Launch the poll. According to the audience here, which SOA technology category do you think will have the biggest enterprise impact by 2030? Will it be action orchestration platforms? Will it be trust and safety orchestrators? Do you think it'll be autonomous agent networks? Because that's what you hear Google and IBM and Amazon and Microsoft all talk about. Or will it be synthetic enterprise builders, which is kind of not being talked about enough, but will come to life as more and more digital native behavior, AI first behavior is witnessed by enterprises? So I'm taking a look at it. It's interesting how many people are putting their money on autonomous agent networks. That is very interesting. And obviously action orchestration platforms. So that's the leaderboard as the audience sees it. There is no agreement or disagreement here, but it's very interesting for us to reflect upon this. CJ, what do you think?
Yeah, I think, it's early days clearly, right? And I think agent orchestration and autonomous agent networks are kind of go hand in hand in some ways, right? The two are different ways of looking at the world, right? And I think there are going to be takers for both. And I think in some ways that's probably those are the big delta elements that we see. But the key point that I would really want to talk about on this is that for systems of action to scale, right? It's not just the orchestration platform or the agent network that needs to be plugged in, right? That's a classic bolt-on strategy that the software industry has lived with for a very long time and lived successfully with, right? But purely from an enterprise value standpoint, right, that doesn't necessarily scale unless it connects back with all the other building blocks.
Yeah, yeah. All right, let's move on to the last section wherein we have what really matters. The question of how will systems of action rewire enterprise spend? Let's move on to the next slide because that is a very busy slide, and that's why I'm calling the math slide. If you are looking and analyzing it, fair enough, go ahead and do that. If you're a math whiz, you'll probably figure it out yourself. But let me give you an overview of what our calculations show. What this slide essentially shows is that the real breakthrough of what we are calling the process first mentality will be that it will expand the addressable market for technology from 3.5 to 4%, which you see in the second row, column A bottom, which is the traditional technology spend, to up to 75 to 85% of enterprise revenue, which is the entire enterprise OpEx spend. That is where the process first mentality will take it to. Today, most of the tech vendors play in a very small slice, mostly infrastructure, software, outsourced IT, and process. But with systems of action, that will change dramatically. Because when, as an organization, CEO or the CEO or CFO need to activate data, embed decisioning, orchestrate processes intelligently, technology will no longer just support the business. Technology essentially will unlock the core, which is the operations. And that is why operations will become the new frontier. Spend on SOA technologies will rise from 1 to 1.5% of OPEX to 5 to 7% of the entire OPEX base. That's huge expansion. I mean, in terms of time, it's almost 10x. And that is where the true value of this is. So while traditional IT spend or tech spend will shrink as platforms or SOAs absorb most of the routine work, that decline will be, and note more than offset by the rise of agentic autonomous execution platforms. Let me show this to you in a chart. Let's move to the next slide because there is a lot of data there. So what you see here is the blue dotted line, which showcases to you how technology spend would have happened if there was no system of action, no process first mentality. However, with systems of action, the gray mountain that you see, that's where the spend, which is currently, I would say, at a very small tick, will grow into almost a $3.5 trillion market just for the global 2000 in North America. And we can do the math, extrapolate it, and give you the numbers even for the global numbers. But there is a $1 trillion total addressable market bump that we see out of it, which will essentially mean that the traditional tech spend in the SOA scenario will actually be a shrinking market, a melting ice cube, which is the red line as you see it. So the question for you as tech vendors here is, do you want to play in the rising mountain TAM, or do you want to play in the market, which is a shrinking market? And that is a choice that you will have to make essentially. And already see the likes of ServiceNow, in certain cases, Salesforce, making that express choice of how they want to go about it. So that's the punchline that I want to leave you with, because it will be very important for you to see how enterprise categories are going to change and how essentially the basic purchase of technology will determine what markets and what technologies enterprises will buy. CJ.
Yeah, yeah, and Abhishek, the way I see this happening is the red line really happens along three dimensions, right? Because as you build more autonomous systems of action, you're going to sell less fragmented products, right? the per user license model starts coming more and more under threat. And also with agentic AI, we are going to have fewer risky modernization initiatives, because if you can expose the data and you can drive systems of action riding on a lot of hitherto siloed systems, right? That also reduces the traditional TAM, right? Um, Having said that, right, I think the big upside here is really on the process piece, right? Could you just go back? Yeah. So the real upside here is on the process piece, right? So we see, as Abhishek mentioned, tremendous opportunity in the process segment, because it's going to need a lot of technology intervention. And at the same time, it's a completely new buying center outside of the traditional enterprise IT bracket. So we are talking shared services, process owners, functional owners, so on and so forth, right? And really, the massive opportunity here is across all of this. We are looking at, by 2030, we're looking at a potential TAM of multiple trillions of dollars, all of which, of course, is not going to be penetrated and seized immediately, right? But that's the nature of the art of the possible here, right? And finally, the traditional IT TAM is going to decline, right? And is going to be offset significantly by the SOA opportunity. So here, that's the provocation for all of our friends on this call today. Let's look at how you are going to react to that. Could you move to the next page? Right. So what's going to be a plan of action here, right? We could keep, showing dashboards and as action engines, right? We are on this journey. Hang on, right? CJ and Abhishek, you are already preaching to the choir, right? We are already ahead of this, right?
Yeah, it's interesting how some of these things are playing out. Uh, I'm doubtful organizations would be just rebranding dashboards as action engines. I think we've heard enough feedback about how dashboards are becoming more and more inert. What I'm putting my money on is more of embedding agentic into enterprise OpEx workflows. That's where most product teams will focus their energies on, obviously alongside the building agentic capabilities. And as I see the results coming in, it seems very much in line with how I predicted. I think I should gamble a bit more when I go to Vegas.
Your lucky day, Abhishek.
Yes, indeed. So should we share the results in the interest of time? This is what it is.
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, let's take it away and to the close, CJ. I think we have messages
Sure.
and
Thank you.
yeah.
Let's move to the next page. Right. All right. So here's my key message. Um, Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a drill. This is real. Agentic AI and services of software are key building blocks, but the real holy grail is systems of action. And we are at an inflection point in the industry where the traditional models are at significant threat of disruption, and systems of action have the potential to eat all of that up. And but at the same time, it will create a new market and a bigger market. That's the potential. These are real living, breathing systems. They will need to be designed so that they can adapt and evolve to enterprise needs, right? Finally, and that's the bottom line. If we don't help our clients on this journey, somebody else will, and we will lose relevance, right? So that's the call to action for all of us in this ecosystem today. Let's look at what lies ahead. We still have a few minutes left. We could probably take one or two questions.
That's a strong call to action. You've cleared.
My chat GPT sends to you, CJ.
All right, there you are. That's your system of action. So, all right, I think we don't have a lot of time for questions and answers. We've got a lot over chat, and we'll try to respond to each and every one of those. In the meantime, feel free to reach out to us with your questions. And we have some very exciting events in Dallas coming up later this year. Feel free to talk to us to understand how you can be part of our ecosystem in those events. Would love to have you there to talk more about systems of action and lots more. Thank you once again for joining us today. If there are no further questions,
I think there is one point that I
we-
would like to chime in with because
yeah, go for it.
yeah, both Dallas Engage and the Dallas Elevate event that we have. Oh, sorry, where did it go? Yeah, I'll take care of the slides. Both focus on this very aspect because we are engaging with the right kind of leaders who focus on this process first mentality. And it's both a question of bringing the industry together to have debate and decisions around how systems of action will play out. So that's why what I will strongly recommend the audience is to check out what we plan to do here. And if you can, do participate, whether in person or virtually, in these events. So that's the key message that I'll leave you with.
Yeah, absolutely. And feel free to reach out to us. Would love to hear your perspective. And like I said, we are offering a complimentary assessment of your solutions on SOA readiness. Love to talk more with you.